Hello, welcome to this video about summarizing. I'm going to be kind of going through some of the ideas that the chapter 7 in our textbook outlines for how to write a summary, and I'll be applying some of those to the Nicholas Carr Is Google Making Us Stupid essay that we read at the beginning of the term. There are, according to our textbook, 4 components to writing a summary. They have these on page 156. First is describing the author's key claims. Remembering here that a summary is not designed to be completely comprehensive and include all of the details, the total kind of blow by blow of an article. That would be something more like a paraphrase or a synopsis. And a summary doesn't do that. A summary strips those things away and just focuses on the key elements. So here we're probably talking about the main claims that the author is going to be arguing in support of, not so much focus on supporting claims. It also involves selecting examples that illustrate the author's argument. Again, here we wouldn't be describing all of the arguments the author makes, but we might pick out some examples. So say if someone's arguing their main claim has something to do with we need stricter gun control measures, we could say, for example, they offer statistics on the rise in gun crime in states that have weaker measures or something like that. It also involves summarizing. It involves presenting the gist of the author's argument. So the gist here is to kind of give the overall view, kind of wrap it up all in one nutshell, not only kind of the author's main claims, but what is kind of the article aiming to do overall, maybe its overall purpose or its overall also genre. What kind of article is it, what's it designed to do, and what are the main claims it puts forward. Those kinds of things can be captured in the gist. And lastly, contextualizing what you summarize. This involves always keeping the reader focused on the context of the text itself, and that it's not just just summarizing the subject matter of the text, but you're talking about how the author represents that subject matter and addresses it in their text. Okay, so the book gives some strategies for kind of how to read when you are planning to summarize a piece, and one of the strategies they recommend is chunking. So this is basically grouping related material together into chunks, basically, throughout the piece. This helps you figure out the text's kind of key claims, its structure, and its overall stance on its topic. So it's a way of trying to step back and get a broader view of the whole piece and kind of divide it up into parts and kind of look at what those parts are doing in the essay. So there's a few ways we can do this. First, we can notice how paragraphs begin and end. We can keep an eye out for the author's point of view and the author's use of transitions. Again, there are several kind of key words and transition words that can sort of signal when the author is expressing a certain point of view on her topic, or when her point of view has maybe changed, or she's moved from talking about another's point of view to going back to her own, that kind of thing. And when chunking, we also are looking for the main claims, things that seem to be the main ideas of the text, what the supporting examples are, and if the author makes any concessions and counter-arguments. So let's look real quickly just to get an idea of how chunking might work. Let's kind of run through briefly here Nicholas Carr's essay to see how this would work. So first off, just noticing how he begins the very first paragraph here. He's of course quoting here this supercomputer HAL, which is basically an artificially intelligent computer in this movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, real classic science fiction film from the late 60s. And it's a scene where as Carr is describing it here, Hal is kind of shut down, has to be shut down by his human owner, and he says, Dave, I can feel my mind going, I can feel it, I can feel it. So it's important to think about, all right, what kind of tone is he setting here about technology right at the beginning of the essay? I think some people pointed out in class that, Carr does seem to address some of the good points about technology and acknowledges some of the ways in which it's helpful. But if we're, presenting this very first example, and with this quote of my mind is going, I can feel it, I can feel it, and Carr says, I can feel it too. If we bear in mind, right, that one of his main subjects here seems to be the impact of internet technology on the brain, the fact that he's saying, I can feel my mind going as well, should signal right here that even if he's trying to be balanced, his assessment of the internet's impact on our brain is going to be pretty negative. We can see his stance right off, in other words. Chunking, first off, by helping us, focus on the beginnings of things, beginnings of paragraphs, the beginnings of the whole essay, can help us find ways right away to kind of locate exactly what the stance is that the author's taking on the subject. He then goes on here in the paragraphs that follow to talk about his own experience with technology and how it's changing his reading habits. In particular, here in his first paragraph or second paragraph, he's talking about how he's lost his general attention span, how he can't focus long enough to sit down with a complex text. He bounces all over the place. As he says here, again, the sentence that ends this paragraph, the deep reading that used to come naturally has become a struggle. And in the paragraphs that follow, as we continue kind of to chunk up the essay here, we can see that he's talking kind of about his own experience, kind of his own anecdotal experience, though he's not only talking about his own experience. So he's saying, for me, as for others, the net's becoming a universal medium, the conduit for most of the information that flows through my eyes and ears and into my mind. He again gives some more personal experience with this, but he also says, I'm not the only one that's experiencing this. So here he presents a couple other bits of anecdotal evidence from Scott Karp and from Bruce Friedman, both of whom comment on their own abilities to read deeply that have been sort of lessening here as they've spent more time online. But then he signals here he's going to be moving to a different kind of evidence in this paragraph. He says, anecdotes alone don't prove much. So even though he's given us some anecdotal evidence, now he's moving to a new kind of evidence because, as he says here, anecdotal evidence on its own is not that strong. So he goes on to cite a study from that the University College London did on changes in reading habits, and then he cites this book by Marianne Wolf, Proust and the Squid, that also offers some other maybe more authoritative research on this topic. So now he's kind of presented his maybe some of his initial evidence, we might call it, for his point here about the internet's impact on the brain. In this sentence here, we notice he's going to do something different. Kind of out of the blue, he says, sometime in 1882, Friedrich Nietzsche, famous philosopher, brought a typewriter. And so we can see right here, he's signaling a different kind of evidence he's going to start talking about. He's going to be looking backward, back in time, and looking back through history, which he does, as we see in what follows here, where he discusses the invention of the clock, how that came to affect the way people approached workers in factories, and seeing how people can function more efficiently in the workplace, etc. And goes back to the history of artificial intelligence with Alan Turing, and kind of comes back up all the way up to Google. So by talking about this guy, Frederick Winslow Taylor, who's the one that went into a steel plant with a stopwatch and started figuring out how people can be even more precise and clock-like in their work. He brings that all the way up to Google, which he says is a um, a company that practices the religion of Taylorism. This guy Taylor's idea about um, maximum efficiency in people's work and productivity. Um, so again, the way that he describes some of what Google's doing, sounds on the surface like it might be exciting and positive, right? And we can see uh, Carr making that kind of concession here when he says such an ambition, this ambition to basically create a kind of artificial intelligence with Google. He acknowledges that, hey, such an ambition is a natural one, even an admirable one, for a pair of math whizzes, he's talking about the Google people here, with vast quantities of cash at their disposal and a small army of computer scientists in their employ. Why wouldn't they be the ones to maybe succeed in this ambition? But we can see here in the next sentence, next paragraph, he is going to signal how he's not all rosy in his assessment of this, right? Still, there's an important transition word right there, right? Still, kind of like however, or but, their easy assumption that we'd all be better off if our brains were supplemented or even replaced by an artificial intelligence like Google is unsettling, all right? So he signals his discomfort with this in the next sentence. And goes on to critique this idea, all right, in what follows. So looking for things like this is a good way to keep your place in kind of where the writer's position is, because writers will acknowledge the other side, they'll make concessions, they'll look at both sides of an issue, but at some point they'll signal to you, hey, even if I'm acknowledging this side over here, here I am coming back to my initial position. I don't think this is all positive development. He also signals down here a possible counter-argument. Maybe he's just a worrywart. He acknowledges that there is a long history of people that have been paranoid and suspicious of technology, even back to Plato and the development of writing. Also, the arrival of the printing press also brought up the same sorts of worries in people. And the implication being here that these things didn't end up being the downfall of our civilization. They, of course, have done amazing things to help our civilization move forward. So he says, so yes, you should be skeptical of my skepticism. Perhaps those who dismiss critics of the internet as Luddites or nostalgists are right. And in the end, this is all going to be a good thing for us, right? Notice again, though, he signals his response to that counter-argument. Then again, right, we have another word. Good transition word, still, or however, we have then again, the internet isn't the alphabet, and although it may replace the printing press, it produces something altogether different. So he's trying to say, hey, the net is quite a different thing than writing or the printing press. It stands to have a much stronger, more broad effect on our thinking than these things. So maybe we have more reason to worry about the internet than, say, we did about the printing press or writing. Okay, so that's just a way that you, as you're going through, you will, if you were to summarize this essay, you would of course have read it already, like you all have, but then going back through and looking for these chunks of different paragraphs and different sections could help you sort of outline the article and step back and get a better view of what it's doing. Okay, so to go back here then to our summarizing, after chunking here, we can maybe pull out some key claims from Carr. Here are just some of my paraphrases of his key claims. You may have understood his key claims differently, and there are multiple valid ways to interpret a piece, but at least here's what I took away from it. So he's saying that internet technology may have serious impacts on our cognitive abilities and habits, some of them possibly negative. Notice I've used the words may and possibly there to indicate that, Carr is not saying that he has knocked down, drag out hard evidence for this. The science is still out on this subject, but he's kind of warning that, hey, these are possibilities out there. I think he's also saying that increased reliance on internet resources such as Google appears to affect the way we read and even think. Okay, that's maybe a bit more of a supporting claim to the first one, but I still think one of the big ones that he's focusing on. And lastly, as we use internet technology, we may begin to take on its qualities, processing more information quickly and broadly while taking less time to think deeply and creatively about that information. So if you remember, as he's making his historical argument about the typewriter and the clock, at some point I think he quotes someone as saying, we tend to start to take on the qualities of the new technology that controls our lives. In a way, we came to take on the qualities of the clock when the clock came into our lives, and we started to operate more efficiently and kind of mechanistically like the clock did. So I think he's making the same point about the internet. There are also several examples here. In your summary, in addition to kind of stating here are his main claims, you'd want to offer some examples for how he makes his argument. In other words, what are the different kinds of support or evidence or reasons that he gives to support those claims. So here are a few different ones that, any one or two of these would work, plopped into your essay. You could mention that he refers to anecdotal evidence about his own reading habits and those of his friends or other people that have written about this. You could indicate that he cites the University College London research on study habits. I talked about things like power browsing, etc. He talks about Frederick Winslow Taylor and this idea of Taylorism and how Google is taking that up and is striving to systemize everything it does. You could also mention that he does make a concession. He says that, hey, my distrust of technology is similar to suspicions that other people have had of past technologies, like the writing and the printing press. So in addition to describing the main claims, you want to offer an example or two, depending on how long your summary is going to be. It might only be one example of how he makes an argument, but if it's a bit longer, you could offer a couple of these. The gist, this would again be the overall overview of the piece, including not only its main claims, but kind of the kind of piece it is, the kind of text, what's it doing, what's it designed to do. And so here is my attempt to capture the gist of Carr's article. Nicholas Carr's article, Is Google Making Us Stupid?, is a critique of internet technology in which Carr, while acknowledging its many advantages, argues that internet technology, and Google in particular, may be impacting our cognitive abilities and habits in negative ways, including our ability to read difficult and lengthy texts and to think deeply and creatively about the ever-growing quantity of informative content we are being conditioned to process at accelerated rates. Okay, kind of a wordy, chunky sentence there, but I wanted to try to capture it all. Of course, you could break up your gist into a couple sentences if you like. I guess I could have done that here. But notice I've not only included the one or two of the main claims in this sentence, but I've also given my take on what kind of text it is. I would call it a critique. I'd say in the end he's being very critical of internet technology, and that's the main goal of the piece. So I include that as well in the gist. So lastly, in drawing attention to context, what kinds of details make up the context? Well, it's various contextual facts and bits of information, things like the author of the text, its title, the publication date and place, the author's area of expertise, perhaps. You might not have room to include all of that in your summary, so the minimum, of course, to include would be the author and the title of the work. Perhaps the kind of work it is. In this case, it would be, an essay or an article, as opposed to a whole book or an academic journal or an academic article, rather. Okay, and that for your syntheses, I'm only interested in you including author and title of work and maybe kind of work or genre. But I think the most important thing in terms of context is to keep the context clear throughout your essay. So that means frequently reminding the reader of the context by attributing the claims that you're describing and paraphrasing to the author. So it means using tags like Carr argues that, or Carr cites a study, or Carr goes on to claim. Notice in all of these, Carr is doing something, and you're reminding the reader, hey, this piece was written by this guy named Carr, and he does these things in the piece. Okay, so again, the focus here is on the text, not on the subject matter of the text. You are not, if you summarize car, you should not be summarizing the internet or the internet's effects on the brain. You should be summarizing what car says about these things. And that means using these attributive tags, as we sometimes call them, like car argues that or car cites a study that, in order to always be signaling to the reader, I'm talking about what he said. This isn't what I think about it. Okay. So I hope this has been helpful. We will be talking more about summarizing in class, and you will be doing some of it in your upcoming literature synthesis essay. But I'd be happy to discuss it further with any of you. All right. Thank you very much for watching and listening.